to be putting our eggs in any single one basket any longer. We don't want to be locking in all our needs for several years and then falling off the cliff again to the blue market and a new set of conditions. But now we're moving towards this resource diversity, and we say some detail here about incorporating a variety of resources or fuel types looking for greater longevity. And here are some keys in a diverse portfolio, and you've heard this before. We want to look for fuel diversity, stable costs versus fluctuating costs. If economic, and then again, this is something that the council needs to weigh on with respect to, for example, a wind project, but renewable diversity. How important is that to us long term? That's an opportunity to lock into long-term projects, perhaps for renewable supply. Of course, there's no renewable standard that we're mandated to perform today as municipals in the state of Pennsylvania. There is a mandate on cooperatives and other regulated utilities here in the state. So there is some precedent already set in the state for such a mandate. But municipals are not subject to that. So renewable diversity, there is some potential to consider renewable resources. Again, if the economics are there. And much of what we've heard from you is economics are essential to you. It needs to be economic in order to consider it as a long-term resource. And so that has to be weighed in balance with, is there any additional value associated with that renewable supply? And really, the wind project that AMP has offered, really will establish a precedent in essence for what renewable options we can put into the Boro portfolio, only because the economics of that option are a slight premium to where market is. So it really draws that question, is that close enough to say that wind is interesting? So again, it requires, if you see it as being something valuable, you're saying, well, we assign at least some value to having renewable in our portfolio. We've talked about contract term diversity, but varying our terms is very important. Historically, the Boro has leaned on a single set of market purchases and has not had a resource portfolio that's been diverse. Based on what I hear, we're willing to consider these diverse resource opportunities that are economical. I also heard a resounding statement last time that essentially said we're really not as interested in contracts that are more than 10 years. Now that may be in flux. Maybe you do or don't have that view. But that was one of the takeaways I had, is there's definitely a reluctance to participate in longer-term contracts. So we just got to understand that if we're going to limit our long-term alternatives to 10 years or less, that's going to come from market more than likely. The wind project is an anomaly that is only 10 years, but most of the other projects we've considered have been projects that last longer than that. So that's something to continue thinking about, is how long are you willing to consider projects that last longer. Just a few other considerations, and again, this is not in the scope of the meeting this evening, but with respect to retail rates and the move from, the Boro moved from full requirements fixed price to block power arrangements several years ago, and I'm not sure the rate structure has been updated to identify with the type of cost variability that might exist in this type of portfolio. So just generally speaking, I recommend that when we start going through the process of locking costs for 16 and 17 and shore those pieces up, that may be the right or appropriate time to start taking a closer look at the rate structure and making sure that the different components of that rate are healthy to track costs in the market and provide, again, greater assurance that your rates are providing appropriate revenue to recover these costs. So these were the final next steps really coming out of this master plan effort. 3 different stages, focusing on 14, 15, and locking in some of the monthly purchases. 16, 17, locking in some of those needs to cover up to the 70% mark. Again, providing greater price assurance in those years. And then post 2017, rolling into procurement, longer term, with different cost stable options in the 3 buckets. would like to walk away with some sense of whether or not this is the type of plan, this layered approach that you want to endorse going forward, or as it might compare to the bulk purchasing method used previously to buy 5 years at one time, kind of, get that done in one component. So we've taken your feedback and developed this layered type approach. And the next step would be to go ahead and begin to carry out some of these purchases that we've layered as being the perfect time to do that now. So I think that's the master plan that we've laid out. And I think we definitely like some feedback too on the feeling regarding this plan as it relates to achieving Boro objectives. And does it mirror what you would like to see for the borough?
Anyone from the council? There's not any questions. Council, like the idea, the philosophy of what Gary was just asking us, whether we're going to layer this into the future and break down long-term needs, mid-term, short-term needs. Let's say
I like the idea of block purchases, first one, as the short-term, mid-term, and long-term that was described, that Eric described. I would like to see in the future some options on renewable energy. However, it's my feeling that renewable energy at this stage of the game is kind of like an experimental stage of stuff. And it may, the cost for renewable energy may come down in the future. So I kind of like to lean on that, and that's basically what my feelings are at this point.
thanks, Bob. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'm impressed with the plan. Gary, I think you guys did a good job. Certainly like it broken out in stages, and I think it gives us some visibility into our future needs. Again, I think it achieved the goal of providing a plan that gives us some stability, some predictability, and actually some leverage within the market. So we're not held to our feet to the fire to make that once every 5-year purchase. We've got a long way to get to 2016, but I think it's structured well. My question is, we talk about the market, we talk about block purchases, percentages here, percentages here. Who are we buying this from? And how do you see that market evolving? Who is it? And are these opportunities going to present themselves to us?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have the borough has an existing relationship with American Municipal Power. Again, I characterize that relationship as an energy manager who is facilitating your purchases in the market. Sometimes we tend to think of AMP as a supplier, and they are, but they're not supplying anything in and of themselves. They're going to market suppliers and securing contracts on our behalf and passing that through to us. So it's important that in that relationship you see there are other counterparties out there in the market. These blocks will come from a variety of those counterparties. Even if they were to come through the AMP relationship, in other words, we get one bill from AMP and it represents all these costs. These blocks are procured from various partners depending on who provides the most competitive proposal. We're not sole sourcing, even if we consider purchases through AMP. Of course, the Exelon block, we found a competitive offer. It was external to AMP, so we took it directly. But it would come from a multiple source of suppliers. And I think these suppliers are anxious to purchase these type of standard blocks. There's several, a handful at any given point in time that are competing for this business.
So AMP becomes more or less a broker for larger projects throughout the region, so to say. We buy perhaps in blocks with other municipalities and take advantage of the larger purchases they make to maybe make a smaller purchase in conjunction with them.
That's
AMP brokers that together.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of utilizing them for the purchases is that if we are able to make bulk purchases, we do it in combination with other utilities and try to get the economy there. So AMP is really just a vehicle for the purchases of those supplies from other counterparts. Of course, AMP does offer these projects that we hear from time to time, where they've signed a contract with someone, some type of development project. We get to see that and review that. Those are projects that come across our desk that, at the simplest level, they're a vehicle for procuring that supply from any number of market suppliers.
But we're not, within this plan, restricted to only purchasing through them. We can look at Exelon.
Sure. Sure. If there's a supplier that we don't believe is being identified by AMP as a potential competitor, we have and can look at other alternatives to that. Exelon being a case where we did find one. And we also encourage those suppliers to talk to AMP and bid into those processes. So we're watching those. Whenever procurement occurs, we're watching that and trying to determine who are the entities that are involved in that process. Are they a good variety, and are we happy with the overall competitive level?
Is there any way, do we have a breakout of what AMP charges for its overseas taking out their broker services? Because that's what they'll produce energy. They're just a broker, correct?
That's basically true. I mean, they do provide other services related to planning and whatnot that we utilize. But yes, their service fee structure that they have.
Yeah, is there any breakout of that?
I don't have one currently, but we can show you a service fee breakout structure. I'm sure Dan can pass that along.
And is there any competing companies with that provide?
Certainly. Performing that day ahead operations and scheduling component, there are other entities out there that perform that function. It's not, when we talk about where we focus our attention right now, we're certainly focusing on power costs, because that's the bulk of the cost, but there are other entities that provide these types of services similar to AMP. Our membership with AMP, I think, does offer a different variety in the sense that it avails projects as they come along. So that is interesting and something that when we see projects come across our desk, that's not something that any other entity out there can necessarily provide to us. But the energy management, scheduling, operations component is certainly something that extends to other entities and can be considered. The projector. There you go.
Any other questions regarding this topic? Council? Very well done, Garrett. That's a lot of information. We need to discuss this item. You have a question? Go ahead.
When you said AMP has, companies coming to them for their services, are there some that go exclusively through them? Like we would, if we didn't use AMP, we use somebody else? Would we know about those projects? Or are some projects exclusively with AMP?
I think that's what I was trying to communicate, is that some of the projects that come through AMP and that we are offered are a result of our membership with AMP. That they would not otherwise be offered to us.
So is that significant?
That's significant in my eyes, especially if this council believes that considering alternative supply projects, you think about the different projects that have come across your consideration since we started reviewing alternatives. Wind, landfill gas, we've also had combined cycle generation, along with all the block power products that we typically review. There are hydro before that's been looked at, so all the different sources of supply.
So we'll look at that, we'll consider that when we look at their fees or their charges versus the others. Okay, that answered the question.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Go ahead, Flo.
Garrett, the energy sources, the producers of the energy, they do go out there to sell their products, is that right?
Sure.
Okay, so do they go to you, or how do you become aware of what's out there, what's the best product to buy?
Sure. We're in the marketplace for any number of clients at any given point in time. So you know what's going on by being involved and active in the marketplace, and is also involved. And so there's different means that this borough council can get information on what types of alternatives are coming, and that's from a variety of sources. But we're certainly involved in the marketplace with so many clients that we kind of understand the different types of products. I get phone calls, hey, would your clients in Pennsylvania be interested in this type of product or that? So these things come in regularly, and they also come in hand pretty routinely as well.
Okay, so we look to you for the latest and the greatest as far as energy sources are concerned.
The latest and the greatest. We're very in touch with what those alternatives are. But let me just say this, that the point that Barbara was noting related to the options that come from AMP, you've really got to consider the size of the borough of Perkasie with respect to the size of some of the power plant options that perhaps you'd like to consider. Those options are otherwise not even fathomable for the borough independent. And it's only through an organization such as theirs. I'm not suggesting that they would be the only organization out there that could offer that type of possibilities, but they are one, and they have brought a number of those types of alternatives that without their involvement, we would have never been able to participate in really any one of those projects because of their size. The breakdown of economies across the members unveils the different types of cutting-edge power supply alternatives that might be out there, and gives the borough an opportunity to consider them, at least.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, my last question, I hate to go backwards, but is PJM, right, $20, correct?
Correct.
Is that going to just continue? Will that go down? Will that go up? Are we getting anything back for that in terms of infrastructure? Don't we understand why we paying this? I want something in return for that.
Yeah, let's kind of, I think we've tried to separate those charges into different buckets, but I'll try to be more distinct. Historically, you've needed access to the transmission system, so your network transmission service, you needed ancillary services. Those components are just the natural components that you need and that you pay for, all along. Some $5, $6, $7, $8 a megawatt hour for those components. But then you have this RPM capacity component that started in June of 2006, and again, largely based on developing reliability. So when we talk about what is it you're getting reliability of service, of capacity being available during peak periods, so we don't see a rolling blackout or something of that nature. So what are you getting? That's what you're supposed to be getting. And that's what FERC asked PJM to put out there. The predominant portion of that $20 is that RPM component. And you see it's significant. When you look back at the breakdown of PJM charges, it's at least $10 a megawatt hour, if not more. And it's bounced around a little bit here in the first few years. As Dan mentioned, next year we're going to see an increase in that cost. And that represents some $4 to $5, I think $5 a megawatt hour, 5.5 an increase. So it's a significant issue. How's it going to respond in the future? Honestly, we think we've seen the lowest of those costs for RPM, unfortunately. And as economic conditions return and load growth ensues, there's going to need to be additional capacity built in the Northeast. And that's going to come predominantly from gas-fired resources, particularly peaking resources. And that cost, it's often called the cost of new entry, but the peaking cost is going to drive the cost for that RPM market. And unfortunately, the RPM market as it exists today is much lower than the cost of new entry, or that peaking, the cost to develop a peaking facility. So I wish I could say that the RPM and PJM components were going down. I think it's really going to go up in the future, and it's going to be particularly that RPM component that will be there, the capacity component. It's not a rosy picture. It's not a rosy picture.
Is that regulated?
PJM is responsible for implementing the program, and FERC is responsible for residing over that program and whether or not it's achieving the result that they wanted in terms of reliability in the region. So yes, it's being regulated because FERC regulates PJM, and PJM is developing this program. There's still much discussion regarding that program at the PJM level between generators and web serving entities, and changes are being considered all the time. But in terms of that type of market going away, it's here to stay. And that's what
If we were to buy power directly from Exelon just on a continual basis, would we have that PJM cost?
Yes, you would have when we talk about buying from Exelon, we're mostly saying we're buying the energy from Exelon, but the capacity component comes from PJM. A distinction here could be on a bilateral basis, a transaction between another counterparty. You could say, will you sell me forward capacity? Will you sell me that capacity that I need to satisfy my RBM obligation? So you could have an entity take a forward position on capacity and sell you that. An entity like Exelon would be an example of an entity who would be willing to sell and transact on their forward curve for capacity because they have a lot still in the ground to offer that from. So in much the way we're looking at energy today, your capacity can be considered the same way. If you're concerned about rising prices on capacity, you can take some component of your capacity requirements and invest in generation or invest in a bilateral deal. I will say this, if prices continue to rise in the RPM market, and this is something that Dan's certainly aware of and we've talked about previously, in fact, we had some discussion about it upstairs before coming down. There definitely can be a consideration among the Pennsylvania boroughs of jointly participating in development of peaking projects to mitigate against the cost of RPM exposure. And if costs were to continue to rise, I definitely believe that's something worthy of consideration, so that you're not just completely dependent upon PJM, but you have something for. You said, what do we have for this? Well, you have something for it. If you're going to pay the dollars, maybe you want the capacity in the ground and some kind of energy potential out of that resource as part of that deal. So.
Thanks, Gary. Any other questions? Okay. Dan?
I don't have a question there. I just wanted to try to frame this. There are a number of questions on the table. If you want, Garrett and I can try to summarize those. I don't want to make this more difficult than it needs to be. If you are satisfied with the majority of what you've heard, I think we would just like to know that. Or if there's still lingering questions, I think we need to kind of throw those out there, like the type of diversity, the time frame, the percentages. If you want to have further debate on that, we can put that on a future agenda and discuss it. So I'm kind of throwing it back to the council here and saying, how many more questions do you want answered? What debate do you want to continue to have on these issues as we go forward? Or are you ready to take a bold step and just look at this plan as it is? I mean,
I think the council will tell you, but I think we need to digest what was presented. That's a lot of information. We need to have another meeting on this and discuss it some more. Is everyone okay with that? I mean, is there, certainly, it's a lot of information.
Okay.
Good information, but a lot.
Could I write down?
Go ahead. Sure.
Some of the things you talked about there, Dan, really should be laid out as options. What percentage this, what percentage that. You can't get 9 people to go off the plan, different plans, or anything more than that. I think you have to lay out some options that make sense given Eric's position and recognizing what's going on in the farm.
That's kind of what I was getting at. Like, you want us to define what some of the pertinent questions were, again, in terms of percentages or diversifications or time frames or, on and on.
We talk about implementation, and when implementation, you know what questions you need. So, yeah, you should bring those questions back to the council so they have the opportunity to say, yeah, we want implementation this way, later this way, so forth. But I don't know, you guys have to make a recommendation on that, I think, unless you disagree with me.
No, I format to discuss. Of course, there's pertinent questions here that we need to answer. We're going to have to take them one at a time and digest it and debate it, talk about it, come up with something. Yes, you're going to have to steer this truck. And I think Garrett just did that tonight. He pointed us in the direction possibly that we would like to go. If we want to go there. If we don't want to go there, then we need another plan.
And the first priority this year, we have to decide what we're going to do for 14, 15.
Well, actually, I would say there's two priorities here. 14 and 15 would be a portion of what we would lock down today, but we're also talking about 16 and 17 today. The last time I heard that from several of you that you're interested in knowing pretty much today that a significant portion of the needs in 16 and 17 are covered at a lower cost. If that's true, then your direction back to us could be, well, proceed with that target that you've provided in a way of 70% of your energy requirements being locked in, and proceed with 14 and 15 at those levels. Or your direction back to us could be, we think the percentage is too high for 16 and 17. You know, why would we want to lock in so much today? Or you might, have the other side of that as well. So that's an example of the type of thing. What we put together for you are certainly the targets. That if I were coming to you with a recommendation today, I think I would put these targets here and say this is how I would apply for it. And if you see areas to change that, then that might be the feedback. But I think we put together reasonable figures that we would believe in going forward. So in terms of how much percentage goes in the long-term, mid-term, and short-term bucket, I think we've defined that. And then the question now is, do you see any reason for changes in any of these areas?
Jim, if I may offer a suggestion.
Go ahead.
I like the staged approach, the 3 stages. I think there are questions that we need to answer inside of every stage. So if we could just take the last slide, 38, Dan, and maybe extrapolate from that into each one of the stages and the decisions that need to be made. Again, remembering that this is a flexible plan. What we're putting together is a structure, or called a skeleton, for how we're going to build this portfolio going forward. I think if we can take a look at those, less the graphs, which were all very helpful, by the way, but maybe take the 38 slide presentation, put it into a couple bullet points under each stage for us to consider. We'll come back at the next meeting, and have a discussion about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect sense.
And I do agree that those recommendations they have are important in that, carrots. So,
I think that's why the next steps were staged the way they are, right? Because that's what we need to address moving forward. So, does everyone agree with that? Okay, I will do that. We'll set up a future public utility committee to discuss all those steps. Okay. All right. Dan, you finished? Okay, Garrett, thank you. This is time for our second public forum. To reveal the purpose of the council.
Andrew Rumbold, South 8th Street. This is a lot of information. I appreciate, the fact that we're looking at a diversified thing to try to, spread things out so we're not looking at, what happened in 2008. One of the questions I had was how this whole thing fits in with that we're part of the Pennsylvania Municipal Power Agency and what part that plays in all this.